Today I'm going to share my story. But before I begin, I just want to put out a few disclaimers. First and foremost, I am not a preacher. I am here to share my experiences. And it might resonate with some of you. For others, it might just go over your head. But somehow, I believe God will plant a seed, and with time, it will be watered. When Pastor Sean asked me to say, Taurai, I need you to give a speech, or I want you to tell your story, I thought of a quote I once read written by Oscar Wilde. And Oscar Wilde said, "We are all in the gutter, but some of us choose to look to the stars." We all face mountains. We all face challenges. The question is, are we willing to look to the stars? Are we willing to climb that mountain? Over the past 30 plus years, I've been climbing a mountain that, in all honesty, I don't think I'll ever peak. But through the process, I've learned 3 lessons that I want to share with you today. The first one is accept that mountain. The second one is choose to climb that mountain. And the third one is understand that climbing that mountain is not an event, it's a process. So how did I get here? And why am I here? My story starts in 1982. And as I've been told, when I was 2 weeks old, I started to struggle to breathe. My mother panicked, as any mother would, and they ran me to the district hospital. At the district hospital, they stabilized me, but they realized this is really a complicated situation, and they rushed me to the central hospital in Harare. A few days later, and after many tests, the doctors sat back and said, okay, here's our hypothesis. We think this kid has got a hole in his heart. But unfortunately, at that point in time in Zimbabwe in the early 80s, there weren't any pediatric cardiologists, nor was there the type of equipment that could give us a clear diagnosis. So, they sent me home. And as a toddler, I had many hospitalizations for chest infections and other infections and other ailments. But we never could come to a conclusion to say, what's wrong with this child? What's his problem? Fast forward to when I was 10 years old. And at that time, the doctors back in Zimbabwe said, fly to South Africa, like all the politicians do, and go and see a specialist cardiologist who can hopefully solve your issue. I remember being so excited landing at Jan Smuts Airport. For those younger in the audience, that's OR Tambo. And when I landed, we were taken to Hillbrow. And trust you me, Hillbrow was still the place to be back in the early 90s. We had a beautiful apartment. And for the first time, I jumped on a double-decker bus. And I was on the first level of that double-decker bus. There was no one at the bottom, but I wanted to be at the top. And then we went off to Joburg Gen to see this specialist. And so began my great South African adventure. And a lot was discovered in those 3 days I was at Joburg Gen. First and foremost, yes, I did have a hole in my heart. The second thing is, I didn't have a pulmonary artery. So what does that mean? So we all have the lungs. The right lung, there wasn't anything connecting that lung to the heart. So in essence, I'm breathing off one lung. So I've got a hole in the heart. I've got one lung that's working and the other lung's just chilling. This complication then resulted in my lung that was pumping having so much pressure that it started to struggle to get oxygen to the rest of my body. The challenge was, it was so complicated. It had become so advanced that these specialists said, we can't do anything. It's too late. And so they said, go back home, but a few things you've got to get right. The first is you can never play sports. Second, you can't exercise. You can't exert yourself. And finally, accept that you might have major other complications later on in life. As a child growing up, watching my peers play rugby, seeing the first team going rounding out onto the tip, I always used to ask God, why me? Why did this happen to me? And I'm sure most of you can relate. You lose a job. You've been praying for somebody to get healed, they don't get healed. You have a terrible breakup. And you're sitting there finding yourself in a gutter and asking God, why me? Let's move forward a bit. I grow up, yes, a naughty kid, but still I grow up. And at the age of 17, I had my first kidney stone. At the age of 19, I was diagnosed with what people call the rich man's disease. I started to have gout. In 2010, while everyone was enjoying the World Cup, I was sitting in high care at Sunny Hill Hospital because I had a terrible pneumonia infection. And that's not even the scary stuff. In 2013, I had major internal bleeding around my kidneys. And later on in that year, I received one of the toughest diagnoses I've ever gotten, which was that I had now gotten congestive cardiac failure. A big word, but it really means that your heart muscles are becoming so weak, they can't pump the blood to the rest of your body. I remember getting this diagnosis the same weekend when Nelson Mandela died, and I was sitting in hospital watching the state funeral, and for the first time I started to ask myself, how long do I have? How many more years do I have to go? And the following year, I was at death's door. I started going into multiple organ failure. Sorry. So I had a major seizure, and with that seizure, I went into a coma, and I was on life support for about a week or so. But God wasn't done with me yet, all right? A month after that, I was discharged, and I walked out. But as you can imagine, my mental health started to suffer. 2 years later, I was then diagnosed with major depression. And I had to spend some time in a psych ward as I was dealing with, suicidal thoughts. And I needed to get the help before it was too late. I looked back at my life and I started to ask, did I lack the faith to get healed? Was there some sin in my life holding me back from God's promise of healing? And one night, I picked up my Bible and I found myself reading the Gospel of John. And I want to share with you John chapter 9. And I'm going to read from the Message version, verses 1 to 5. And it goes, walking down the street, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked, Rabbi, who sinned? This man or his parents, causing him to be born blind? And Jesus looked around and he said, you're asking the wrong question. You're looking for someone to blame. There is no such cause effect here. Look instead for what God can do. We need to be energetically at work for the one who sent us here, working while the sun is shining. When night falls, the work day is over. For as long as I am in the world, there is plenty of light, and I am the light of the world. I'm going to switch it up a bit, and I'm going to say, let's look at it from the New King James Version. And in verse 3 it goes, Jesus says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. God answered my why me question with this verse. The first lesson I've learned on my journey is accept the mountain you face. Don't ask why, but rather, how can God's work be done in the midst of this situation? How can God be glorified? So what do I need to do in my situation? That was the question I was faced with. What should I do so that God can be glorified? So I started to seek God, and I felt God saying, Taurai, you need to take responsibility for your healing. And I had to start working on my situation. The doctors had done everything they could. I have a little pharmacy at home that even when I go and hand in my scripts, I'm on some of the highest dosages that the pharmacy gives. Look at me twice and, are you sure this doctor got it right? Yes, it is what it is. So I felt God told me, you need to work on 3 areas in your life. My mental, physical, and spiritual health. At the time, I was overweight. I was still struggling with suicidal thoughts. So what did I do? I listened to God, got a dietitian to get my eating right, found a biokinetist so I could start getting my exercising up and about, and then looked to meditation and mindfulness to help get my mind right. The second lesson I've learned in my journey is that once you accept the mountain you face, make a plan to get out of it. Seek God's wisdom and guidance to give you that plan to get out of that situation. And then more importantly, work the plan. Work the plan. But how long is it going to take? In my case, I've learned one of the most toughest lessons in this. And that is, your situation might not change overnight. Mine hasn't. In a sermon called How to Deal with Darkness Times, Pastor Timothy Keller says, even for believers, even for Christians, dark times can last a very long while. And I think for me, is that when I started to work on my plan, for months I didn't see any results. Nothing changed. Nothing moved. And one analogy that I used to help understand this is that think of yourself as walking in the dark with nothing but a lamp. You know the destination. You know the path. But you can only see 2 steps in front of you. So in my case, after 8 months of working on this situation, working on myself, I lost about 15 kgs. I found myself being more present, being able to deal with the complications of life brings to us. And through prayer and meditation, I started to understand God's vision for my life. And I knew that even though things might be tough, I might not see the results, I have to trust in God's promise, and I have to trust in the process. Because that's what's going to get me to the top. But the strange thing about climbing mountains is that just when you think you've reached the peak, You land on a ridge and you realize, jeepers, there's another level to go. I want us to look at the second book of Kings. And we're going to read about a king called Hezekiah of Judah. Now, Hezekiah was the son of an evil king called Uzziah. But unlike his dad, he wanted to please God in so many ways. And to get a context of how much he wanted to please God, I'm going to read 2 Kings 18, verses 5 to 6. And it goes as such. Hezekiah put his whole trust in the God of Israel. There was no king quite like him either before or after. He held fast to God, never losing his grip, and obeyed to the letter everything God had commanded Moses. And God, for his part, held fast through all his adventures. So, here's this king. He's doing everything to please God. He's doing everything right in front of God. And the reason why I bring him up is that some of you here tonight are doing everything you can to build your relationship with God, to be closer to him, but you still face mountains. You still face challenges that you can't seem to explain or understand. Hezekiah faced two major crises in his life. The first was the Assyrian threat. Now, the Assyrians were a nation which we can say is the superpower at that time. And Hezekiah, in wanting to please God, turned his back from the Assyrians, and then they said, you can't turn back on us, and they wanted to destroy his kingdom. They had already invaded the northern Israel, and they were on their way to Jerusalem to destroy him. The second threat in his life was he became very ill at one point in time. And as was the custom in the day, the prophet Isaiah came to see him, and guess the message Isaiah had for him? Buddy, get your affairs in order. You're going to die. So why do I share this story? Because in Hezekiah, we find that ascending mountains is an ongoing process that we must be willing to engage. In both examples, when faced with crises beyond his comprehension, Hezekiah didn't look to blame anyone. He didn't look to ask why, but he put his faith in God, and God was faithful. In July this year, I was hospitalized for the second time in 2019. And while we were doing a number of tests, we found that there was a tumor on my right kidney. And just like Hezekiah, I was faced with another crisis. Cancer. Could it be? Could it not be? After I've already got a broken heart and half a lung. But at that point in time, the doctors said, we're not going to do a biopsy. Your medical condition is still very iffy right now. Let's give it 3 months. We'll do the scan again, and let's see how the growth of the cancer had, or if the tumor has grown. And in those 3 months, I put my trust in God, knowing that whatever was to come, he would be faithful. 3 weeks ago, I went for the second scan, and God being faithful and God being who he is, there was no tumor. Right. In concluding, we are all in the gutter. We all face mountains. We all face challenges. And the story that I wanted to share with you is that you've got 3 options. Accept that mountain for what it is. Seek God's guidance and wisdom through introspection, through applying the principles Tabo talked about, through applying and searching what's inside that Josette talked about, so that God can help you to put a plan together to get out of that situation, to help you ascend that mountain. The other thing you have to accept is that as long as we're in this world, the task of ascending mountains is going to be an ongoing cycle. You think you've done with one, another one comes up. Ascending mountains is difficult. But in doing all of it, there's always one thing that you hold on to. And that amidst all these trials, tribulations, challenges, God will be faithful. Hold on to that. Hold on to the knowledge that as you climb, He's there with you. And that thing that He's prophesied in your life will come to pass.